Hello, Breakfast Club viewers. Welcome to the third program in our Shark Week series, for which we are so excited to welcome, in alphabetical order, Jasmin Graham, Melissa Cristina Márquez, and Dr. Andrew Nosal. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so we are going to hear from each of these shark scientists today, and each person's going to do about a 15-minute or so kind of flash science talk on their area of expertise. But before we get going, I want to tell you a little bit more about each of our panelists today. Jasmin Graham is a shark scientist and environmental educator specializing in shark and ray evolution and ecology, who's also remapping the future of shark science as project coordinator for, I should have asked you how to say this, is it MarSci-LACE, or how do you actually say it?
Perfect.
Oh, nice, okay. For the MarSci-LACE project at Mote Marine Laboratory and Aquarium, and as CEO of the organization MISS, which is Minorities in Shark Sciences. So welcome again, Jasmine. So glad that you're here.
Thanks.
Melissa Cristina Márquez is a PhD candidate at Curtin University, also known for just a ton of amazing science communication, such as authoring the wild. You want to just do this, Cristina? You're better at this than I am. Authoring the Wild Survival Scholastic book series, hosting TV shows for outlets such as BBC and National Geographic, podcasts, and for making all of her educational content bilingual, which is so cool. Thank you again, Melissa.
Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Andrew Nosal, professor of environmental and ocean sciences at the University of San Diego, also a member of the IUCN Shark Specialist Group for the Northeast Pacific region, and known for like really extremely cool research that uses a range of GIS and modeling tools to study the behaviors of shark and ray populations and how they're changing. Welcome again, Andrew.
Thanks.
Before I start, I'm going to hand this off right away because you're all so much more interesting than me. But before we do that, I wanted to ask each of you how and when you fell in love with sharks in the first place. And Jasmine, we'll start with you again.
The how and when, I would say it was in undergrad when I was at College of Charleston. And I was pretty neutral about sharks. I hadn't really had any experiences with them, so neutral. And then I met a professor, Dr. Gavin Naylor, who did shark research at College of Charleston at the time. And he was just very excited about sharks. And I was just excited that he was excited. And I said, well, something that's getting this guy this jazzed, I got to go investigate. So I went and worked in his lab, and I fell in love with sharks and rays. And everything that I did after that was being compared to my research with sharks and rays. So I figured, that's what I want to do. I want to do elasmobranch research. So that's how I got here.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a good sign when nothing else measured up to that. Melissa, what about you?
I grew up on an island, so the ocean was kind of always a part of me, and marine life was always a part of me. So ever since I was little, I wanted to be a marine biologist. But then I saw sharks on TV, and they looked pretty badass. So I was like, yeah, that seems like something I want to study. Pretty sure Dad kind of wishes I stuck to guppies, though, but he's come around to it a little bit.
Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I was an undergrad, and I had the opportunity to study abroad for a semester in Australia at the University of Queensland. And I remember on one field trip, we were snorkeling or maybe scuba diving on the Great Barrier Reef, and I saw my first shark in the wild. And I just remember it was striking because it wasn't a scary experience. It was just really relaxing, and then kind of frustrating because as I tried to get closer to the shark, it didn't care and it just swam away from me. But that was just really kind of an eye opener and made me want to learn more about them. That's
what you decided to make them love you?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm going to remind before I take Andrew and Melissa briefly off screen and give Jasmine her slides, I'm going to remind all viewers that you can ask questions at any time for any of these experts, and we'd love for you to. Just go ahead and leave them. If you're watching on Facebook, leave them in the Facebook comments. If you're watching on YouTube, leave them in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on those and collect them all, and then we will ask as many of them as we can at the end. So please do. This is your chance. When's the last time you had 3 shark experts sitting here? Okay, so Andrew and Melissa, we will say goodbye to you just for the moment. We'll remove you from screen. And Jasmine, was it when you first started seeing sharks, was it like a certain shark that did it? Or was it just all of them?
So I started working with hammerheads, and I'm still obsessed with hammerheads, particularly bonnetheads. Bonnetheads are my favorite shark because they're adorable and they eat seagrass, and I think that's super awesome.
Oh, it is. And you're going to talk more about those in this presentation?
I am.
Okay, awesome. I will get out of here and let you do it then. Okay, we'll see you at the end. Thank you again.
Thank you. All right, everyone. So I am going to be talking about some of my research and how I got to where I am, and I'll share a little bit about the organization that I co-founded with 3 others called Minorities in Shark Sciences. So a little bit about my journey. I was always interested in learning, and I loved school. When I was in elementary school, I was in a program called ALERT, which is a magnet program for kids.
Is
magnet. Oh,
okay. No, I was like, do I need to come on? I'm getting out of here again. Thank you. You froze for a minute.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Am I unfrozen now? I think I'm okay.
Yes, you're okay. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start that over in case you missed some. ALERT is a program, magnet program for students in elementary school interested in science and math. So I did that. Loved doing that. And when I got to middle school, when I was about to go into middle school, I decided that I wanted to keep doing science and math. So I went to another magnet program called the Learning Collaborative, or TLC, and really got really interested in science, mostly because I'm a super curious person, and science is all about asking questions and finding the answers. And so I just loved doing that. I also grew up around the ocean. So my dad is from a fishing family in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And so I spent a lot of time fishing with him and around that sort of seafood fishing atmosphere. And so I was always very interested in the ocean because we got our food from the ocean and we're very connected to the ocean. But I took it a step further than a lot of my family members because I had questions about what the fish were doing when they weren't on our plate. And my family did not have the answers to those questions. So they decided, well, let's go send her to a camp where she can get all the answers to all of these marine questions about the ocean. So I went to a program called Marine Quest, which is at the University of North Carolina in Wilmington one summer. And I realized in that camp that you could be a marine scientist as a job and people will pay you to study fish. And so I said, sign me up. That sounds awesome. I want to get paid to go fishing and study fish. So I started looking at colleges because I went to that camp, I think my freshman or sophomore year of high school. And then I decided, hey, I'm going to try and figure out how I can be a marine scientist. So I ended up going to the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina. And originally my major was biology because my parents were like, I know that you're saying that marine science is a job, but I don't know anyone that's a marine scientist. That doesn't seem like a thing. So maybe be a little broader in case that doesn't work out. But I was majoring in biology and taking all of these courses in kind of ocean sciences. And I decided, well, this is silly. Why am I sitting here in a biology degree when what I really want to do is marine biology? So I changed it and just dived in head first to the marine science and started doing internships. So I did a lot of internships and things through the National Science Foundation. I did 2 research experiences for undergraduates, which are REUs. One at College of Charleston. That's where I was working with Gavin Naylor. And that's when I first fell in love with sharks. And just because I like to try a lot of things before I settle, I also did an internship at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center that was more marine chemistry, where I was looking at ocean acidification. And I decided, nope, still like sharks. Sharks are still the best. So I kept going back to that. and became a member of the American Elasmobranch Society through the Young Professional Research Fellowship thing. And I started getting really involved in elasmobranch research and decided I think that I want to go to graduate school. So then I did my master's at Florida State University, and that was funded by the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. That's also the National Science Foundation's program. And that's when I started working with the smalltooth sawfish and fell in love with the smalltooth sawfish. I'm still doing a lot of work with the smalltooth sawfish. And I moved down here to Sarasota to be closer to my collaborators that are doing sawfish work. And I'm working at Mote Marine Laboratory. And I run a program called MarSci-LACE, which stands for the Marine Science Laboratory Alliance Center of Excellence. And it's a program that's geared towards increasing participation among underrepresented minorities students in marine science, which is something that I'm very passionate about. And I also have myths, which I will talk about in a little bit. So I just have some fun pictures of me doing my research. So this is just Jasmine's research through the years. So I started out with the hammerhead family and doing what's called phylogeny, which is basically building a family tree, who's related to who. And I was very interested in this because hammerheads are weird and a lot of people have questions about why do they have these heads? How did they get these heads? What do the heads do? And so I started looking at that, and I did CT scanning and digital segmentation, which is basically like a dissection on the computer. And I also did their genomics using mitochondrial genomes, which a lot of people don't know this, but there is DNA in the mitochondria, which is cool because it's only passed from the female. So the male's DNA does not get mixed in there. So it's a very interesting technique to use the mitochondrial DNA because it has less changes in evolutionary time. So that's what I did and had a good time with that project. This is also when I started doing field work for the first time. And this is a picture of me holding a bonnethead, which is the very first shark that I ever caught, which has something to do with why bonnetheads are my favorite sharks. And after doing this field work and getting involved in that, I realized that I was more interested in ecology and doing kind of things in the field than in the lab. And so that's why I decided to go from evolutionary biologist kind of into the ecology realm, where I'm out in the field studying the animals in the wild. Like I mentioned, I did some other research too. This is one example. This was my research at the Smithsonian, and this odd contraption is the contraption that we built to take water quality measurements on the go. So the water is constantly pumping through this weird pipe thing, and the measurements are being recorded in this giant box with all this machinery that kind of looks like a bomb. And it is very cool, very interesting stuff, but was not really what I was interested in. And I just kept coming back to sharks. I also did some work with microplastics in sand and some other random things, marine mammal stranding, necropsies, and things like that. But everything just paled in comparison to sharks. So that's why I kept doing sharks. And here's me cleaning some equipment during my Smithsonian internship, because I learned that the Chesapeake Bay, well, I knew this, the Chesapeake Bay is very fertile, which means that if you put equipment in the water, everything wants to try to live on it. So you constantly have to clean it off. Lessons learned there. And like I said, this is a chemistry-based project. So I did a lot of titrations to figure out what the pH of the water is and all of that stuff, which was neat. And I'm glad that I got that opportunity, but I was not super interested in chemistry. I'm actually kind of bad at chemistry. I did not do well in chemistry classes when I was in college, but you don't know until you try. So I did that and did some work with some plankton as well, discovered that microscopes give me a headache and I need to do stuff that you can see with your naked eye. So all of this to say that you don't know if you don't like something until you try it. So I like to try everything and figure out what I really like. And then, of course, now I do more ecology things. I still do a lot of work with hammerheads because nostalgia. I'm very fond of hammerheads and I'm interested in conservation. So I work with a lot of threatened and endangered species. Of the 10 species of hammerhead, most of them are threatened. And so I am very interested in working with them. So this is a picture of me working up a great hammerhead with my advisor, Dean Grubbs, and my lab mate, my former lab mate, Blake Hamilton. And then, of course, we've got the smalltooth sawfish, which is near and dear to my heart. The smalltooth sawfish is a critically endangered species of ray. You can tell that they are rays because their gill slits are on the bottom. Sharks have their gill slits on the side. Rays have their gill slits on the bottom. In case you ever need to identify something randomly, now you know. So they're super cool animals. And my research with them, I'm mostly doing tracking. So I put acoustic tags, which are surgically implanted into the sawfish. And whenever the sawfish swims near a receiver that's in the water, which you can see here on the far right, that receiver can hear the sounds that this acoustic transmitter is making and identify it and say, okay, this animal is right here, right now. I'm going to record and I'm going to keep recording until it goes away. And so I can tell when a sawfish arrived in an area, how long they stayed, and all of that. But I also use another technique called satellite telemetry. And in the middle there, we have an example of a pop-off satellite archival tag, or a PSAT, which they are put on their dorsal fin, and they estimate their position continuously, but it is an estimate, so it's not nearly as good as the receivers because you know where the receivers are. But it is good because that way you know where they're going relatively all the time, and you're not kind of tied to the receiver because with the receivers, it's kind of when a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't make a sound type situation, where if the sawfish decides to swim away from where there are receivers, you have no idea where they are. So the satellite tags help us get some more data in terms of where are they when they're not by the receivers. So I use a combination of those two tags, and I'm interested in knowing where they move because they are critically endangered. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting the habitats that are important to them. We want to make sure that they're not at high risk of bycatch, which is when fishers aren't trying to catch them, but they accidentally do. That's one of their biggest threats, is being caught accidentally in commercial fisheries. So a lot of my research is focused on seeing where they're spending their time so that we can strategically make decisions about where fishing can occur and where protected areas need to be put in place and things like that, with all of the information that we get on where they are and where they're spending their time. And the last thing that I will talk about is Minorities in Shark Sciences. So Minorities in Shark Sciences, or MISS, is a year old. So it's a brand new organization. We have 315 members as of last week, and it probably has gone up since then. And we have 50 friends of MISS. So all of our members are women of color or gender minorities of color that are interested in shark science. And our friends of MISS are people that are in the shark science community or shark science adjacent and don't identify as women or gender minorities of color, but are very interested in supporting our mission. And we have a couple of programs that we do. We have our Gill Guardians program, which is an online platform where people can go and learn about sharks and their relatives. So there's curriculum up there, there's activities, There's videos, lessons, all of that, and it's accessible to anyone with an internet connection. We have it for all ages. We have stuff for adults. We have stuff for K through 12. We have it in English and in Spanish, and we're soon to have it in all of our content translated into French and Portuguese as well. So that's one of our programs. We also do fellowships where we pay the travel costs for people to go and do internships at our partners all around the world. And we also have our new program, which is the Rising Tides Mentorship Program, which is a program that supports pairs of women and gender minorities of color, where there's a senior scientist and someone that's earlier at stage in their career, and gives them support for them to mentor that student through a research project for a year. And we're really excited about that. And we will be announcing the winners for those awards in August. And and generally what we do are day-to-day sort of happenings and myths. We have monthly meetings for our members to do professional development, network. We're all about connecting people to people that can help them with R codes or getting samples, learning how to do a permit, because that's a whole thing to get your permits through and everything like that. So that's kind of what MISS is all about. And if you're interested in learning more about MISS, you can visit our website, misselasmo.org. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. I also have a Twitter if you're interested in following me. I talk about sharks. I talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in science. I talk about other random things. I also have my email up there if you have any questions that we don't get to today. Thank you.
Thank you. That's so cool. I put a link for MISS on both platforms so people can go right to it. I was also just going to ask, sorry if I missed this, but in terms of the students that can get involved, what's the age range?
So we have students as young as high school. And so we say high school because we're all putting everyone in a Slack channel and stuff like that. But there are people who have their parents are on it on their behalf. So they have there's 3 moms that are in the group that have middle school aged girls, and they're like, yeah, I know that they're too young, but I'm going to get in here so that we can show them all the resources and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it is.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to bring Melissa on screen now. And Jasmine, we'll see you just after Andrew speaks. So see you in a minute. Thank you again for that. All right. Hi, Melissa.
Hello.
Hi. Okay. I'm going to give you your slides. There they are. And yeah, thank you. I'll see you as soon as you're done.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Marquez. I'm a Latina, Mexican, and Puerto Rican marine biologist who studies shark habitat use and our relationship with sharks. So like I said earlier, but if maybe you didn't hear or you're just tuning in, I started out loving the ocean at a very young age. Ever since I could remember, the ocean's always been a part of me, and it's actually my first memories. I grew up in Puerto Rico, which is an island. And so first memories were me at the beach, chasing fish schools, harassing hermit crabs with my cousins on the beach in Puerto Rico. And so it wasn't until I was a little bit older, but still a kid, that I realized that I wanted to become a shark scientist. I'd been telling my parents I wanted to be a marine biologist for a few years at that point. And I turned on the TV and watched shark shows. And that's when I was like, yep, this is what I want to do. So my love for sharks has been very long-standing now at this point. But I'm specifically interested in shark habitat use, so figuring out why sharks are where they are, but also our relationship with sharks. So a lot of people, they're either afraid of sharks, are indifferent to sharks or they really don't like sharks. And I'm interested in seeing what kind of factors go into that mind process. Is it something as age, gender, political party, culture, what your friends do, what you do, what kind of factors kind of go into the shaping of our attitudes toward sharks, and how that in turn sways conservation initiatives to either be successful or unsuccessful. But the shark habitat use, so all that previous stuff is my social sciences background and what I do there. But the shark habitat use is the ecology bit that I do. So you can see here in the picture, I'm carrying what looks like a stick in a baggie. It's a stick, all right, but it's actually got a bit of bait on it as well, and that is what we use for our brubs. So I do study shark habitat use through two different mediums. One of them is through drones. So what I like to do, or what we are doing rather, is hovering drones over certain spots to see what kind of sharks are there, what's the number, how long are they actually sticking around for. So I'm using drones as a scientific tool, but I'm also using baited remote underwater video systems, or BRUBs as short. Essentially, it's a fancy way of saying it's an underwater camera that has a cage around it so sharks don't continuously bump into it and make a mess out of the camera. And then it's got a stick with a treat bag at the end to kind of entice animals to come a little bit closer. BRUBs aren't exactly new. They've been around for quite a while now, and not only bring in sharks, but a bunch of other animals as well. And if you're wondering what the video kind of looks like, I took a quick little peek of it. Sorry that the camera's a bit shaking, but as you can see, there's some animals out there. And then, of course, we've got some sharks that come in for the bait bag as well. So if you didn't see that, we'll just play it one more time, just because I'm obsessed with these sharks. They're so, so cute. There we go. A nice little nibble on that bait bag. So that way we can figure out what kind of sharks are in an area, possibly not just the species, but also the sex, how big they are, and sort of kind of piece together what kind of distribution sharks have in a specific area without doing tagging. So this is a little bit less invasive in a way. And so, ooh, didn't want to play it again. There we go. So there are a few different shark species that I am focusing on right now. So as Laurel said earlier, I am a PhD student at Curtin University in Western Australia. So the animals that I'm focusing on are from the Indian Ocean, such as the black-tip reef shark that you see at the top there and that you saw in that video. Definitely probably one of my favorite sharks of all times, just because they're very cute, and the pups or the baby sharks are very adorable as well. Then we've got the gray reef shark that we see on these brubs as well. So those two are definitely the sharks that we see the most on the brubs. But sometimes we get to see tiger sharks, which are my absolute favorite sharks. And oftentimes we get white tip reef sharks as well. All of these sharks are absolutely amazing animals, and we know that they're not just there in the middle of nowhere for no reason. So we're using the brubs and we're using the drones to kind of figure out why in the world have they chosen this habitat? What are they doing in these areas? And is it by any chance syncing up with other animals that are there? So very excited to continue with this work. As Laura also said, I do a lot of my stuff on social media as well. So I translate a lot of that work that I'm doing right now, but also other people's works in a way that's easy to communicate and for people to understand as well. Science has a way of sometimes communicating its results in ways that's really hard to understand if you don't know that jargon, so those big words, or the kind of context that things are being placed in. So I try to translate that into something that's fun and something that people care about without any kind of paywalls or anything like that. So I am a founder of the founder of the Fins United Initiative, which essentially is a bilingual program that showcases you different species of sharks and their relatives, such as the skates, rays, and chimeras, as well as showcases different people that work with sharks in some sort of capacity. So not just researchers, but authors who write books about sharks, artists, photographers, aquarium husbandry, lots of different ways for people to interact with sharks, so people can see that working with sharks doesn't mean you have to be just a scientist. You can do other stuff as well. So Fins United Initiative is kind of my pride and joy, even though right now it's kind of on the back burner for a little bit, just because of something that I'm doing right now that I'll talk about in a little bit. The same exact thing with Conciencia Azul podcast. So if you speak Spanish and you're interested in learning about marine science and conservation that's going on from Spanish-speaking researchers around the world, give us a listen on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on really any place that you can find a podcast. We have a season and a half out where I go and interview people who speak Spanish, primarily from Latin America right now, in regards to the work that they're doing and the special and unique kind of obstacles that they have to pass over. So not just lack of funding from their government, but government corruption, a lot of racism, a lot of cultural pressure that we feel in as Latin Americans, as Hispanics. So we talk a little bit more about that as well. And of course, there's tons of shark content in there. Me personally, I do a lot of social media games. So if you look up my name, Melissa Cristina Márquez, you can see me on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and a lot of times I have different social media games. For example, on Mondays, like today, I have marine science papers where I take a marine science paper, usually about sharks and their relatives, and break it down at what really cool things that they found and how you can find that article. On Tuesdays, usually I play a game called Shark Tooth Tuesday, where I put a picture of a shark tooth and I let you guys try to figure out what shark it belongs to. Wednesdays is Name That Shark, so different pictures of sharks. You got to guess what the species of shark is. And sometimes I throw in some curveballs, like the scientific name. Thursdays are ID That Ocean Critter, so figuring out what different type of ocean critters there are, because I am a marine biologist first and foremost. And then Fridays are Follow Fridays, where I use my platform for other people who may not have as many followers, for them to be able to showcase their work and give a chance for you to be able to see what amazing stuff that they're doing as well. I'm also an author. So you can see there, I'm holding 2 books. The first one, which is actually on my left hand, but you can see it on the right. It's the green one. So that's with the croc. That one's called Wild Survival Crocodile Rescue. And the second one that just came out actually a few weeks ago, so right before Shark Week, is called Wild Survival Swimming with Sharks. So the series is called Wild Survival. We've got a third one coming out early next year that I'm actually working on editing right now. But this is my way of kind of showing another audience, so kids from ages 7 to 12, about the amazing work that we do in the wildlife sphere. But it's also talking about representation as well, and different problems that you normally don't see in the wildlife sphere. So for me, representation is really important. As a Latina, I never grew up having a Latina scientist as like a role model. And the same exact thing with Afro-Latinas. My family, I have tons of Afro-Latinas, and none of them ever saw themselves in the wildlife sphere or the science industry. So that's why they kind of moved away from it, because they were like, well, it's not inclusive. It's not welcoming to me. So this is my way of kind of making sure that people feel welcome and they can see themselves through all aspects of my work. And Wild Survival, I'm really proud of, because not only does it teach you about the diversity of animals, but also the diversity of people that work with those animals as well. So if you've got a kid who's interested in learning a little bit of Spanish and other languages, learning a little bit about different animals, and you also learning a few different things as well as some wildlife survival skills, definitely pick up one of those books. You can find them all over where books are sold now. I've also done TED Talks about sharks and their importance, and also about that lack of representation that we see in shark shows nowadays. But I'm very excited that Jasmine's Miss has partnered up with Nat Geo Shark Fest to bring us a lot more inclusive Shark Week shows coming up. So I'm very, very excited about that. And then you can also see me in YouTube and TV. I've done shark shows both for Nat Geo and for Shark Week, so you might have seen me on there. But the biggest one that I'm kind of doing right now, which is why Fins United and Conciencia Azul are kind of on a pause right now, is I'm on board the Ocean Explorer, which is a really big marine research vessel. And I'm getting to do some really awesome shark science with some locals, both in the Azores, but also coming up in the Arctic as well. I've been really, really lucky and blessed to utilize all of the marine tech that they've got here, everything from mapping and sonar to using the submarines, such as you can see me here being very, very excited about being in a submarine for the first time, until I realized that you probably shouldn't eat or drink a few hours before you get in the sub because there's no toilet. But this is what the subs look like. We're in there for quite a few hours down to the bottom of the ocean to check out these amazing deep water sharks. And here is me about a half a mile under our waves. You can see the other sub behind us as well. So very, very exciting. But it's not all super glamorous as a lot of people think. I am also the master chummer. They've given me the title butcher of wet lab because I'm usually the one that's dealing with a bunch of stinky stuff. So shark science and marine science in general can be very stinky. I felt really bad for dropping off my laundry all the time. It's smelling absolutely horrible. But of course, you know, it's made up by the fact that I get to do really amazing stuff, such as looking for whales and looking for sharks and other amazing animals up in a helicopter. There's me trying not to scream from excitement as we get a satellite receiver out to go looking for a tag, and then of course doing more chumming. So I'm really excited with the work that I do. I find it to be a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to, in the next couple of days, ship out to the next mission up in the Arctic and learn a little bit more about the sharks up there as well. And that's it for me.
Awesome. You look very, very happy with that chum bucket.
Do you know what? That's probably the weirdest thing I've ever had to make, which I can't say, unfortunately, what it is until you guys see the episodes that come out at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. But if you watch this show and you see that, you'll understand why my face is the way it is, because it's the weirdest chumming expedition I've ever had to do before.
Huh. Okay. I know you can't say much, but is that because you're chumming for something unusual?
No, it's how we had to chum it. I'll give you a hint. That's a kitchen blender.
Oh, okay. That will never again be used again in a human kitchen.
It was very much bleached and everything else.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to bring Andrew on. And actually, we had a comment that I think perfectly bridges the two of you. Annabelle Gong wrote that they love Melissa's Sharks games. But I believe Annabelle is also, are you their advisor, Andrew?
Yes.
Okay.
I am.
Okay.
Hi,
okay.
Annabelle.
And bad news, Annabelle, because I actually want to hit you up to come on Breakfast Club pretty soon too. Melissa, I will say goodbye to you now. We'll see you, or for the moment rather. We'll see you in a minute. And hi, Andrew. Thank you again for hanging out backstage and being ready to talk. I'm going to give you your slides. There you go. Okay. And I'll see you when you're done. Thanks.
All right. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. I just want to briefly acknowledge I'm broadcasting from San Diego, which is the traditional territory of the Kumeyaay people. And what you're looking at here is my field site. This is La Jolla Shores Beach, just off central San Diego County, California. And this is a place where every year, hundreds, if not thousands, of leopard sharks come together during the summer in very shallow water, just outside the surf. And the focus of my dissertation work about 10 years ago was trying to answer the question, why do leopard sharks aggregate here? So to answer that question, we first needed to know who these leopard sharks are, demographically speaking. And after catching and tagging and releasing hundreds of these sharks over the years, what we found, amazingly, was that 97% of these sharks aggregating off La Jolla are mature females. And not only are they mostly mature females, but these sharks are pregnant. And we know they're pregnant because we've done ultrasounds on them in the field. And so now the research question became, well, why are these mature pregnant female leopard sharks aggregating in La Jolla? And so to answer that question, we used a couple of different acoustic tracking methods. One of them, which I'll talk about here, is manual or active acoustic tracking, where we actively follow sharks around for a period of time. So this involves us catching the leopard sharks and externally tagging them with an acoustic pinger tag, which is about the size of your index finger, and it has a depth and a temperature sensor on it. So once these sharks are released and the tags are pinging away, we can listen for those tags with basically an underwater microphone. It's a directional hydrophone that's mounted at the bottom of this rotatable staff on the side of the boat. So we can rotate the hydrophone and listen for how loud or soft the sound from the tag is. And that way we know where the shark is and we can proceed to follow the shark for about 48 hours at a time. And that receiver, or the hydrophone rather, is connected to an acoustic receiver unit, which is this kind of this basic computer system you see there, which is decoding the pings, displaying in real time what the depth of the shark is, the temperature of the water surrounding the shark, and also recording GPS positions along the way. So we wanted to know why they aggregate at this particular spot at the southern end of La Jolla Shores Beach. And it turns out that this submarine canyon, La Jolla Canyon, is very important. So what you're looking at there is called the 95% KUD, which stands for kernel utilization distribution. And this is basically describing the area where we can expect to find these leopard sharks 95% of the time. So we call this their home range or their activity space. It's basically where the leopard sharks are hanging out. And the 50% KUD is shown there. This is where the movements are most concentrated, and so we call that the core area. Now, we see that it's inshore of this La Jolla Canyon here, but to know why the canyon's so important, we need to layer on top of this map a map of wave height that was averaged over the periods we actually tracked these sharks. So the colors here are not temperature, they're actually wave height. So the warmer the colors, the reds and oranges, are larger waves, and the cooler colors, blues and greens, are smaller waves. And so what you can see right away is that that home range, the 95% KUD where these sharks are hanging out, it's basically nestled in this area of low wave height called a divergence zone. And it's called a divergence zone because as the waves approach the shore, the wave energy interacts with the bathymetry of the canyon, the shape of the canyon, and get diverted or refracted away from the canyon head. So where the sharks hang out, the waves are very calm, but in other places on either side, we get convergence zones where the surfers like to hang out because the waves are much bigger there. And what we see is that the core area, the 50% KUD, is in that little blue patch, right? The area of calmest wave energy. And so what calm waves mean for these sharks is warm water. The only source of heat is the sun at this particular spot, which heats the water from the top down. And if the water is calmer, the water is basically stagnant, and it starts to heat, it becomes stratified, and it stays warm. But in places where the wave energy is bigger, well, the water is constantly mixing with the deeper, colder water because of the wave action, so it never gets quite as warm. So the area where the sharks are hanging out that's so calm, it's about a degree or two warmer than any of the surrounding areas, which may not sound like a lot, but given the choice, it's very important because our ongoing hypothesis, which is now known quite widely for many species of sharks and rays, is that these pregnant leopard sharks are likely incubating their developing embryos in this exceptionally calm, warm water. So leopard sharks, like most sharks, are ectothermic, meaning that their body temperature is the same as the surrounding water temperature. So if their bodies are warmer, metabolism goes up, cell division goes up, the rate of embryonic development goes up, and so the gestation period can actually shrink. And the gestation period for leopard sharks is already 10 to 11 months, and they give birth every year. So you can see why it might be beneficial for them to speed that process up a bit, to have a little bit more time in between pregnancies. So I also want to talk about another species of shark that I worked on more recently called soupfin sharks. And they aggregate as well in La Jolla, just a little bit south of where the leopard sharks do, over a rocky reef. And so like the leopard sharks, we worked, and we see Annabelle here, we have been working to tag and measure and sex these animals for several years now. And like the leopard sharks, these soupfin sharks are also all mature females. Also, like the leopard sharks, they are pregnant. So again, we do this by ultrasound. You can see me doing a field ultrasound here on a soupfin shark over the side of the boat. This is what an ultrasound of a soupfin looks like. You can see the embryo there with the big eye, the mouth. If you look carefully, you can even see the external gills sort of moving back and forth as the waves are kind of rocking the boat and the shark along the side of the boat. So similar to what Jasmine said, we have been tracking these soup fin sharks for many, many years now, 7, 8 years, passively with these underwater acoustic receivers. And we had to team up with researchers all up and down the California coast and into the Pacific Northwest, where various research groups have these acoustic receivers. So by combining forces, we had basically 300 acoustic receivers along the west coast of the United States to work with. And the main finding, what you're looking at here, all of these different diamonds are days in which sharks were detected in different regions, which are shown in the legend up at the top. So along the x-axis here is time, right? So we have over 7 years of time, and we see all of the different sharks that we tagged in different batches over the course of 5 years. And so the take-home message here is that once we tag them in La Jolla, they basically stick around for a few months and then they disappear, but we start to see them detected farther north, all along the central coast of California, some of them going as far north as Oregon and Washington. And then the most amazing thing that we found was that they return to La Jolla. You see those orange diamonds return about 3 years after they were tagged. So what we saw is the first conclusive evidence of a triennial, a 3-year migration cycle, which is the first time this has been conclusively shown in sharks and actually any animal for that matter. So that's been very exciting as well. So that paper was just published. The last thing I want to mention is something I just started working on. So with the advent of drones, we heard Melissa talk a little bit about drones. They're all the rage now. They're affordable. They're easy to access. We've been able to get some amazing footage of the leopard sharks. So that's what you're looking at here. It's footage that's sped up at 4x. So originally I was interested in why the leopard sharks are aggregating in La Jolla, but now I'm trying to transition with some colleagues to figure out how the aggregation actually works. How does the movement of the individual sharks scale up, and their interactions scale up to produce this group level collective behavior that we see here? Now, to get at that question, we need to be able to simultaneously track all of the sharks in the field of view to see how they might be interacting with each other and their environment. We can't do that with acoustic or satellite tracking because the error is too big. But with drone footage like this, we can use computer vision and machine learning to identify the sharks and track them simultaneously. So that's what you're seeing here. Using a method called thresholding, we can use the contrast of the sharks against the light-colored sand to basically lift the sharks off the screen and put them on a neutral background that basically creates trackable blobs for the computer to follow. The software then puts an outline around each of those sharks. And we can actually follow individual sharks to give us a kind of a tour of what's happening inside the aggregation. So we're following shark 135. We see the paths taken by the sharks. All of this can be recorded. And what's amazing about this software is it can maintain the shark's identity throughout, even in most cases, even if they cross over another shark. And so now we can take a look back kind of at the whole screen here and start to see all of these sharks being tracked simultaneously. We see their paths. Now in this particular video, you're only seeing 30 seconds of path at a time. But in this video, I'm allowing you to see the entire path accumulate over time. So again, this is still sped up 4x. This is what 160 sharks are doing over the course of 3 minutes. So I'm just going to kind of let this populate here. I'm actually going to speed it up just a little bit. I'll show you kind of at the end what it looks like. All right, so it's really complicated. So now the next step is working with my colleagues to try to analyze all of these paths and start to see whether there is like a social component to this behavior, or maybe the sharks are all just kind of mutually attracted to maybe a warm water patch that's here. All right, so the work goes on. Thank you for listening. There's my contact info if you have any questions. And I'll hand it back over to Laurel.
Hi. So many people are want like art prints of the shark movement renderings. I'm going to remove this here, and I'm going to bring our other panelists back on. Hi, Melissa. Hi, Jasmine. Okay, thank you all. We have questions for you. The first one is from Mina who asks, and I think we should do this one by a raise of hands. Is marine biology fun? Because I really want to become a marine biologist. Votes for yes? All right, Mina, your career is ready. So this next one is from Olivia, and she didn't ask it of a particular person, but I think anyone who has thoughts or can offer something should just jump in. They ask, how can we figure out things like shark intelligence? Do we know what part of their brains do what? Does anyone feel like I know this wasn't a specific part of anyone's presentation, but curious if anyone has thoughts on that. The professor, perhaps?
I was going to say, it's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, it's not mine either. There's a researcher in North Carolina, Kara Yopak, who is the expert on shark brains. And I know she actually, whenever she gets the question, are sharks smart? She has a lot of things to say about that. But I think the take home is that sharks are really good at being sharks. And so we have to be careful kind of how we define intelligence. But they're really good at sharky stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, our viewers are 1-0 viewers for stumping the shark experts. But yeah, thank you. Well, I'll find that the woman you mentioned's account and link her in the comments in case anyone wants to follow up. This next one is for Jasmine from Jess. Is a sawfish capable of biting or swiping at you?
Oh yeah, they are definitely capable of swiping at you. I have been swiped. They swing their saws incredibly quickly. So that's one reason why we tell people if you're diving, you shouldn't approach wild animals anyways, but certainly not one with a giant hedge trimmer on its face. Maybe don't startle it. Maybe don't freak out. But they have the saw or the rostrum has these modified scales on it that are teeth. And they hurt, they're sharp, they're pointy. They can punch through the fiberglass of boats. We have lots of holes in our boats from sawfish hitting it. So you definitely don't want to be on the wrong end of that. They use it for defense and hunting. And so if they feel threatened, they will swing it. And you don't want to be on the other end of it. In terms of their mouths, they actually have these molar-like teeth, kind of similar to our molars, that are more for grinding and crunching shells of crustaceans and things like that. But for the most part, they actually swallow their prey whole. So that is their hunting strategy. They swing their saw around, they stun the prey, and then they swim back through and they just swallow it whole. So they're not biters, to answer that part of the question, but they do swing their saws.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Now we know. And the whole hedge trimmer thing sounds like super sound practical advice. Thank you for that. So this one is for Melissa. Again from Olivia. So they asked this question when you were talking about the factors. You mentioned kind of studying the factors that influence people's opinions of sharks, and they're wondering if you can just talk a little bit about that. What are some of the things that you found from that work?
Yeah, so I'm currently just beginning on that kind of research, just because I'm early in my PhD career. But one of the things that we are noticing is gender, political parties, and religion seem to be some of the big ones that kind of have an impact in how people view sharks. Why or how big of one, that's something that's still kind of up for debate, and that's what I'm kind of hoping to shed a little light on. Okay,
cool, thank you. And then let's see, we have a specific one for Andrew from YouTube user, I'm not going to try to pronounce it. There's numbers and stuff. But anyways, they said, came in late, but super cool tracking. How many more data points are you using to do your analysis and run hypotheses?
Well, so we're starting off kind of using that one video that I showed you as a proof of concept to kind of develop the workflow for all the analyses. And then while I've been accumulating hours and hours of shark footage of different size aggregations, different numbers of sharks. So it'll be interesting to see whatever those group level properties that we end up being able to find, whether those vary maybe depending on where the sharks actually are, in the aggregation site, how many participants there are, how densely aggregating they are. So yeah, we'll be looking at many more videos that we've been accumulating.
Okay, cool. We also got this really neat question from Stacy, who asked whether you're seeing any similarities between the group movements of sharks and the kind of group movements of other things like bats or birds.
Yeah, well, a lot of like collected animal behavior can be modeled with pretty simple models, actually, like simple movement rules. You can kind of look at the tracks and reverse engineer what the individual traffic rules are, like how close you have to be to an individual before you turn or do something like that. You can have like zones of attraction, zones of repulsion. So you can kind of model, probably we're going to be able to model these sharks, I think, the same way that researchers have previously modeled other groups of organisms.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who grew up kind of near the water, especially Jasmine with your dad was a fisherman, and like obviously Melissa and Andrew, I know you grew up in New Jersey and went to the shore a lot, but the question is kind of for like shark conservation gets often super complicated just because of the number of people involved and because it impacts, livelihoods and ways of life and things like that. So I wonder if, growing up with the ocean kind of being part of your life, does that make you think, do you think that makes you think differently about those conservation issues or kind of have some additional layers of empathy for the many kind of needs at play in those spaces? And Jasmine, why don't you start, since you had sort of the super direct connection there with an actual fishing family?
Sure. So yes, it does. I think it makes me a better conservationist because I know what it's like. I have, that extra stakeholder engagement because I come from a fishing family. And I think that's why diversity in marine conservation is super important, because there are people with different life experiences. And if we don't factor in, the religious implications, the economic implications, just how much people are tied to the ocean, it's very easy for people to start demonizing people and start blaming each other. And if we're yelling at each other and we're not talking to each other, nothing is really going to get solved. So I think it's definitely plays a big part in what I do. And in terms of the bycatch and everything like that, whenever I'm thinking about this, I'm doing this to protect the sawfish and also minimize the economic impacts for the fishers.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Melissa, did you want to add anything?
Jasmine said it perfectly. I mean,
Yeah.
It's one of those things that it really just makes you think a bit more about how everybody's actions is impacting the ocean and how that's actually going to impact the people who rely on the ocean the most. So yeah, Jasmine said it perfectly.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Andrew, you want to,
Yeah, I'll just add that, humans have to be part of the equation when we're trying to figure out how to manage these animals. I think early on in my career, I was very supportive of things like shark fishing bans and shark sanctuaries where, we're just protecting them completely. But as I learned more and really got to know like the scientists who were involved in shark management and fisheries science, there is so much science and so much just intelligence and good faith going into that process that I think we can manage shark populations smartly that minimizes all of the side effects to all the other stakeholders. So I think that the goal is to be sustainable. And I think that can be achieved without just full-on bans of shark and ray fishing. There's a few exceptions, right? Of course, it's an endangered species, that's different, right. But as a whole, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you all. And I know, Melissa, should we let you go now since you've got that hard stop?
I do have to go.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but thank you so much, everyone, for having me.
Thank you. And Jasmine and Andrew, if I could keep you a little longer, there are a few more questions. Great, thank you. Okay, so I was going to ask, I'm losing my questions here. 1 second. Do either of you have thoughts on, this is from Bimal, whether sharks remember the faces or smells of humans or any other mammals? This kind of again, goes back to the harder, and this is not something either of you spoke to and kind of in the same area as the intelligence, but just curious.
So I will kind of answer that. I don't have a straight answer, but I'm going to give an answer that is close. So sharks can identify things and recognize them, whether it's like a face. I can't go that far, but at Mote here at our aquarium and a lot of aquariums, we target train our sharks. So there is a specific pattern that is put into the water, and the sharks recognize it, and they have, each individual has their own target that's a different shape and color, and they know that that's their target, and they swim to it, and they know that they're going to get their food. So yes, they can recognize patterns and remember them and be like, all right, the green triangle, that's mine. When that triangle goes into the water, I need to swim over there so I can get my food. So they can do that.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think that speaks to it quite a bit.
And I think there's good evidence that the sharks can also associate smells with other things, whether humans, wouldn't surprise me. But we know, for instance, that sharks can use smell for navigation. So they associate smells with spatial location. So in terms of like the integration of senses, that's, I think, very well documented.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is another, this is kind of just a all over smattering of questions, but Andrew from Stacy, oh no, this may not have been from Stacy, sorry, viewers, but are soup fin shark called that because they are the species most fished for that trade, or do they have another name?
So great question. So it's only off the west coast of the US that we call them soup fin sharks. In Australia, New Zealand, they're called school sharks because they form schools. And in Europe, at least in the UK, they're called tope, T-O-P-E sharks. But the name soup fin stuck in California because in the 1940s, the soup fin shark was like the mainstay of the shark fishery. They were being fished for their large livers, which are very rich in vitamin A. So there was a big demand for that in the run up to World War II. But in addition to that, the fins were all being shipped overseas to make shark fin soup and other things like that. So the name kind of stuck because that was the most like lucrative part of the shark. So we keep it for historical reasons, but it's not the most pleasant common name.
Yeah. Okay. I've actually wondered that too. I'm glad somebody asked.
Yeah.
Here's one that speaks squarely to both of your expertise. Steve would like clarification on what your favorite type of shark is for each of you. I feel like, Jasmine, you've kind of tipped your hand, but why don't you start anyway?
Yeah, bonnet heads are my favorite sharks because they're awesome. And I think that they're just adorable and they're really interesting. And they're the first shark that I caught. So nostalgia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have to say the same. I mean, the leopard shark, that was also my first shark that I caught. And I just love looking at them because like their color, their spotting patterns is as unique as a fingerprint. So every shark you catch, you just kind of admire because it looks a little different from everything else you've ever caught.
Yeah.
So they're probably my favorite.
Okay, great. And Annabelle would like to know what your favorite thing about being a shark scientist is. And Jasmine, let's go back to you again.
My favorite thing about being a shark scientist, also, sup, Annabelle. My favorite thing about being a shark scientist is that my day looks different every time. I like that some days I'm sitting there at a computer doing our statistics, and sometimes I'm out on a boat and just catching sawfish, and sometimes I'm giving a presentation, sometimes I'm writing a paper, working on a paper, and I think that's really important to me because I get bored if I'm doing the same thing too much, and you definitely are not doing the same thing whenever you're a scientist. There's always something.
Cool. Andrew?
Yeah. So I echo all those things. I'd also say, like, I think my favorite part about being a shark scientist, really just a scientist in general, is also being a teacher. So bringing researchers out on the boats to track sharks. And there's something special about sort of reliving sort of the first time catching a shark and seeing a shark in person, like through their eyes, and just kind of teaching them the ropes. So I really enjoy that.
Yeah. And on that note, we should ask, we almost always get this question either live or after the fact, but for each of you, what is your advice for, let's say we have like a high school or early college student who is really, really interested in what you're talking about. What's your advice for what they should be reading or studying or kind of just thinking about right now? Like Jasmine mentioned so there's just like, there's obviously there's skill sets that are super relevant for emerging scientists now that maybe weren't there, 10 years ago. So current landscape, what would you advise?
So I would say a couple of things. One, I feel like the research the field is getting more and more quantitative. So the more math you take, and if you can learn some modeling and learn some coding, that's all going to be really useful. And even if you don't end up going into shark science, it's going to be useful no matter what you do. Writing is a really important skill that I think it'd be good to have that sort of training in early on. And communication in general. As scientists, we communicate so much, and it's not really a stereotype that most scientists are very poor communicators, because it's not really formally taught. At least it wasn't for a long time. Things are changing now. But I would say look for those opportunities to hone your communication skills, because it's going to be really valuable to you later on.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Jasmine?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I would also say anything that you can do to give yourself a head start on some of these emerging technologies. So I know we brought up drones and R, also ArcGIS is another one, learning how to code, things like that, because science is moving in that direction. And I know when I had to teach myself crash course while I was doing my master's degree, I said, I'm going to do network analysis. I guess I got to learn how to do R and I got to learn how to do network analysis. And if you have the base for that, it definitely makes it easier to get into that later. I would also say that you should try everything. I'm a big proponent of trying things because every experience is either a lesson in what you like or what you don't like. And so you should give it all, just try everything if you have the opportunity, just because you never know what's gonna hit. And I would also heavily second the communication aspect. Learning different languages, also very important to be able to communicate to a wider range of people. If you have the opportunity to learn another language, you should do that.
Yeah, totally.
I had one more thing too.
Yeah.
It just reminded me. I would also advise high schoolers, don't feel like you have to major in marine biology as an undergraduate if you wanted to go into this field. Because some schools, wherever you are, wherever you're going to, they might not have a marine biology major. So don't make your decision based only on that. You can major in biology, chemistry, all kinds of things, basic environmental science, because then you're going to end up specializing in graduate school if you decide to go that route. And then if you don't, well, you still have options because you have a broad enough degree.
Yeah, right.
So don't feel like you have to major in marine biology.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm always also struck by when I talk to curators at the academy or other scientists, some of the best and most interesting scientists were really terrible at math and other things like that in high school, but they were just innate. They were so curious and they were such good observers, and they kind of had that ability to form and ask questions. So I would just throw in that if all of that stuff is just amazing advice, but also if it scares you, you can kind of go back to the core of, am I curious? Do I like to ask questions? Do I like to observe things? And that's seems like a common ingredient with all of you amazing scientists too.
Yeah, and you don't have to be an expert in everything, right? But it helps to be at least conversant, right?
Yeah.
So it's all about teamwork. And so if your skills are not super mathy, that's okay, because other people are, and you can team up. That's why papers nowadays have many, many co-authors, because we all have our strengths, and you got to pull it all together to make it happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. Also, Nunya Biz just left a comment that said, do Jasmine and Andrew know how many people would like to have them as dinner guests? Fascinating conversationalists. All right, I'll ask one more and then I'll let you go. This is for both of you. This is from Linnea. What is your advice for someone who feels instinctively afraid of sharks? I mean, I have to say too, I think Jasmine's favorite shark is both of your sharks actually, they're good starter sharks. They're inherently cute. They're not that big, but what would you all say for people trying to battle that phobia?
I think the best way is to educate, and if you have the opportunity to interact, whether that be going to an aquarium or if you live near the ocean, snorkeling or something like that. I recently took my friend, so my best friend was afraid of sharks. And so I took him swimming with sharks, because I think that until you see that, they're just swimming around doing their thing, you have, you know, all of the Hollywood and movies and negative stereotypes in your mind. And when he said, whenever he first got in the water, he was like, oh, there's a sawfish like right there. That's terrifying. And then he realized within 5 or 10 minutes that they literally did not care about him, and they were just swimming, doing their whole thing. And so I think that that's something that's really good, is to go and educate yourself, learn about them, because usually when we fear something, it's because we don't understand it. And so getting to observe them, whether that be in an aquarium or in the wild, or, you know, watching nature documentaries or something like that, that's, I think, one of the best ways to get over that fear.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'll echo those. I think seeing a shark in person is great. The other thing I would recommend is just kind of reflecting on, like, why you're afraid of sharks. Like, how did that opinion, that attitude form? Because I think it really has a lot to do with the media that we're consuming, right? So the sensational news coverage of shark attacks, the scary background music in shark documentary. I mean, there's a lot of things that have formulated Jaws, right?
You've done studies on that, right?
Yeah. So even background music is enough to really sway people's perception of sharks. So I think, so reflect on that. I'd say accept that it's totally normal and natural to fear sharks. I mean, we should. They're predators. That's okay. But you can have like a healthy respect, maybe not so much a fear for sharks. That's what the fear can turn into. And then I always just remind people that there's no such thing as shark-infested waters, right? The sharks live there. That's their home.
Right.
We have to learn to kind of accept that and learn to live with them. If anything, the waters are human infested.
Yeah.
So,
that's a helpful perspective. And I feel like also a really good like shark fundraiser would be to have you know how like there's dentists that are like specialize in people who are terrified of dentists. You should just have dives for people who are terrified of sharks, and, you know, thousands of dollars, and we'll fix you in free dives with like amazing animals. Okay, there's more questions, but we are hitting the hour, and I feel like you both probably have other things to do for your day. So I really want to thank you for your time. Viewers, I will say, if Jasmine and Andrew and Melissa have helped you love sharks a little bit more, and you happen to have $5 or $10 you don't need, the Academy is doing a fundraiser right now. We're also sharing 50% of the proceeds with Shark Stewards, so I've dropped links for that in there. But what I will also do is drop links for everything that our panelists have mentioned, so their bios, their Twitters, their other related organizations. We'll put all of those links in there as well, so please check back, connect with all these panelists, follow their work, support their work, and come back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. We're going to do a shark tour of our ichthyology collections behind the scenes. But Andrew and Jasmine, I hope that you will come back. I'd love to have you each do a full-length Breakfast Club about your work whenever you have time and energy for it. And thank you for making today so awesome. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.